Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Davis Center for Human Ecology and Coffee and Conversation. And the word I want to leave with you today is Pessamcook. Does anyone know what Pessamcook means or is? Okay, Pessamcook is the Passamaquoddy word for Mount Desert Island. And so Pessamcook means the sandy gathering place where one hunts and spears fish. So it's perfectly appropriate to be called a gathering place. And I just wanted to honor and recognize the fact that we are working with and on Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and generally Wabanaki territories. So, but my role is also to welcome Sue Inches, an alumna of the College of the Atlantic and a recent author. Her book, Advocating for the Environment, just came out last week.
Last week.
Right? Yeah. So this is Sue's first event, right?
Yes.
To be discussing the book, and we're excited about it. And welcome home.
Thank you, Darren.
Yeah. And discussing things about the book and more generally is Dr. Richard Borden. Rich Borden is faculty emeritus at the College of the Atlantic. He was the Rachel Carson Chair in Human Ecology for just about 2 decades. The previous 2 decades, he was the academic dean of the College of the Atlantic, and you'd be hard pressed to find someone that helped shape the curriculum at the College of the Atlantic more than Rich. He really did give us a centering kind of, I guess, a center of gravity for what human ecology is here at the College of the Atlantic. And he also connected us to human ecology all across the world. It's not something we just do, practice, teach, and learn here on the coast, but it is a worldwide endeavor. And so Rich brought us that. And so thank you, Rich, for coming back. And,
thank you.
Interesting to note also, Rich arrived here in the mid-70s to study us. To study as a psychologist, the College of the Atlantic, and we wound up keeping him here. So thank you for that, and welcome both of you.
Thank you, Darren. And what I found was a very good bill of mental health, so I stayed. The great pleasure today is to see Sue back here.
Thank you.
And we were wondering how we would announce what else might go along with this, but Darren has done that for us, thankfully. At the end, after we have the Q&A, there's a table back there where Sue will be signing books. Do buy one. It's an absolutely terrific book.
Thank you.
I think I know the contents of this book before it was thought of to be a book even, and that goes back a long ways.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to start out with a listing of the resume items now. I'll get into that later on. I thought we would start with a different kind of place. And actually a moment in time, and I'm thinking of 1979.
Yep.
And 1979 was your last year at COA.
Right.
And it was my first year.
That's right.
And we both went to commencement that June. And do you remember where it was?
I do. It was the shrine, which is right outside this building.
Right. And we're sitting not far from where we were sitting back then. So
Right.
it's a very curious little piece of synchronicity that all of this sort of floats back into one place like this.
Yeah.
It's good. But we have a couple of we came up with a broad outline, but this can go in so many directions and there's so much to talk about. But I think where we want to start with is, how did you get here? Tell us what brought you to COA? What did COA do to you? How has that worked for you?
Well, thanks, Rich. And before I answer, I just want to say how thrilled I am to see everybody here. And I know there's a lot more of you out there in the virtual space too. And it's just thrilling for me because this is my first event. Book was released last week and I'm going to be doing more speaking, but you guys are my dress rehearsal, I guess. So thank you for being that crowd to see that. And yes, COA. So I had gone to Colby College. I'd taken a year off and I went out west and I was planting trees on national forest lands. And what I saw out there was that the paper companies, the people that harvest the trees, they harvested, burned, and then sprayed herbicides. And as you know, some of the mountains out there, the Cascade Range where I was, very steep-sided mountains. And so they'd spray the herbicides and all the vegetation was killed. And then all the soil was running down the sides of the mountains. And I was out there planting, watching this happen. And it was quite the awakening to me that we were having some environmental issues here. So I did that for a full year, and I came back to Maine in, I think it was early September. And my roommate from Colby had transferred to College of the Atlantic. So I went to visit her, and then it was a week or two before the fall term started. So I applied and was accepted and got in. So that's
that was very close to the standard operating procedure.
They were so happy to have, you know, students that wanted to come. It was still fairly experimental. This is 1975 when I came. So to have people who were enthusiastic, willing to make a commitment to it was pretty welcoming. And I think the other criteria is you had to be somewhat self-motivated, and I always have been. So it was pretty easy fit.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific. And between then and now, the list of things that you have done is very long. Let me just go through a few highlights.
Yeah.
Is after you graduated, I think you worked for a while at Maine Audubon.
Yes.
And then you jumped over the fence and got involved with public relations, working for Hannaford's.
Yes.
And then somewhere along through there, you got an MBA. And then you did consulting and facilitation.
Yep.
And community planning services for a while, then became a director in the Maine Department of Marine Resources, and knowing nothing about fish.
They're right.
We'll get to that. Then you did that for, I think, 7 or 8 years, and then became the deputy director of the Maine State Planning Office.
Yes.
Got involved in many major projects there. Following that was executive director of Habitat for Humanity. And has been active with coastal enterprises for many years.
Yes.
You did the climate tour to Denmark, taking business and environmental leaders to Europe.
Yeah.
Worked on the broadband partnerships.
Yeah.
And I assume you're about to announce for governor now.
No. That's one thing I haven't done is elected office.
Okay. Brace yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, after all that experience, and you and Sue has come to my classes quite a number of times over the years. She's come to the class I did with Isabel Mancinelli on community planning many times, and Ken Klein did that class with me for a year. So did Don Strauss. And then you also came to the human relations class that has been team taught with Andy Griffiths and Jay McNally and Jay Friedlander and stuff. And so, and we have heard this story unfolding over a long period of time. And now it's turned itself into a book.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that evolution?
About the book.
How the fruit came finally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rich was saying to me earlier that he'd already witnessed like chapters in the book because I would come to his class and I would do an hour and a half on a particular subject. And some of those subjects did emerge in the book. But really what happened was I had been doing community broadband planning, trying to bring broadband into rural communities. And the company I worked for decided to go in a different direction, and they laid off all the community planners. So I lost my job there. And so I was kind of thinking about, well, okay, so what do I want to do next? And it occurred to me for the first time that maybe I actually knew something. You know, I hadn't really thought I had a body of knowledge because I had done so many different things, but it turned out that I really did. And I thought it's really about advocating for the environment. And so I wrote a syllabus and I sent it off to Colby and Bates College, and they both bought it immediately. And I thought, oh, this is something maybe people want to hear about, you know? So I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years. And then really summer before last, I was thinking, well, you know, in my classes, I have maybe 15 students at a time. And I thought, you know, what if I wrote this into a book and could reach more people? And I have the very strong feeling that we need more people to be advocating for the environment. So I thought about that, and I asked a good friend and mentor of mine named George Lakey, he was on his book tour. He was staying at our house on his book tour. And I said, one morning, George and I had coffee together, and I said, George, what do you think if I turn my course into a book? he goes, oh, absolutely, do it, you know? And he's a very enthusiastic person, so of course he would have said that, but that's all I really needed to start, you know, fooling around with the book. And then COVID happened, and I was doing some consulting work, I was teaching, so the book was kind of a little thing on the side that I didn't get to that often. But when COVID came, all my other work came to a halt, and I thought, oh, maybe this is my chance. I could actually complete this project. So I just wrote full time, really, from March until end of December. Because of COVID, I couldn't do much else. So I thought, might as well do this.
How did you get the contract?
Well, that's a really interesting story too, because I had gone to several different publishers and one agent. None of them had any interest in it. But I knew North Atlantic Books because I owned a few of those books that they publish. And I really liked what they had done. And they're a nonprofit, mission-based publisher. And I just thought this might appeal to them. But I wanted to get introduced to an editor. But I didn't find anybody who really knew anybody, except Rich. You had an idea there, but your contact was no longer there, as I recall. Yeah. So finally, one day in frustration, I went on their website and I had a proposal all written and I submitted it cold. And there were all sorts of warnings on the website saying, you know, don't expect to hear anything back from us. If you do hear anything, it might be 90 days. You know, so it was all discouraging language on the website. So I went ahead, I pressed the send button, and 1 week later, I had a call from an editor who said, I'm calling to see if you're a real person because we really like your idea, your book idea.
So you had to identify something in a little matrix that you weren't a robot or
not a robot, right? Yeah, yeah. And so that was the beginning of that. And they turned out to be wonderful to work with. Yeah. And just what I needed. You know, I was getting to a place where I thought, I need somebody else to help keep me going. And so they did that by providing deadlines, which, you know, my husband will know are sometimes pretty intense. Oh my gosh, I have a deadline next Monday, you know? So, yeah.
Did you have good editorial support?
Really good editorial support. Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah. Yes, I've worked with them.
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. No, your book was published.
And what worked for me was because in the academic world, usually if you have a book prospectus, it goes out and it gets reviewed by a lot of people who tell you what they know that you should be writing about and stuff like that. But in the end, you're not writing your own book. And the nice thing about North Atlantic was they said, just write the book you want to write.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about it, and this is how I framed it, I said, you know, we've got plenty of books that tell us what's wrong. You know, we know all about, you know, global warming and toxics and, you know, and my book, I framed it as this is what ordinary citizens can do to address this. Yeah. So it's a very positive book. This is about what steps you can take from the very simple things to the more complex organizing a whole campaign thing, but it's all there. I've laid out based on my experience doing this work, how to do it. And I think that is what appealed to the publisher.
Yeah. It is a book that is full of many different kinds of things. It's very rich. Yeah. And the way you structured it is clear. And there's also in it a wonderful surprise too. And I'll get to that also. But the first part of the book is really about thinking. It's about how to think about thinking and what is a story and what does that mean when you try to make a story about the environment. And do you have one? And of course you do, but to develop that in the open, and there's a lot of research supporting what you're doing in that first section of the book. Mm-hmm. And then in the second section of the book, it turns and goes in the direction of action. How do you do something with this? And I was just looking at the title, and you didn't waste any words here. Advocating for the environment, how to gather your power and take action. And it's really it's the intersection of advocating, which has a special meaning, which I want you to say something about. Obviously the environment. Power, which is a word that some people often take the wrong way, but you don't mean it that way. You mean it in terms of how do you practice democracy? Right. How do you actually do it? And then how do you turn that into action? And so the title really captures the contents of the book. Yeah. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the back about if you want, how do you actually write legislation? Right. How do you write letters to and those kinds of things? Plus a terrific body of bibliography of materials and stuff. And you know, I'm now using this book. I'm on a dissertation committee for a graduate student in human ecology getting her doctorate in the University in Lisbon. And this is becoming the tool that she needs to do what she's doing because she wants to do action research
Yeah.
on an environmental issue. So it's you're already in Europe now.
Right, great.
So say a little more about, well, let's start with advocating, because that word is an important concept for you.
It really is.
Yeah.
And a lot of people haven't really thought about the difference between activism and advocacy, but there really are two different things. So activism is really when you're trying to raise awareness about an issue, and you might do some rebellious things like, you know, march in the streets or do a sit-in at a corporate bank, or raise flags and do these things that you're trying to get attention. You're trying to get the media. You're trying to raise awareness about an issue, and that's really important work that needs to be done. But advocacy is actually a little bit different. Advocacy is when you go and you work with decision makers, and what you're trying to do there is you're trying to build a bridge and persuade decision makers to make the decision you want them to make. So whether that's legislators or corporate CEOs or even the town council, what you're trying to do is move them towards your position. And in order to do that, it's all about building relationships. You know, you need to, oh, whoa.
I shouldn't have done that.
Oh, well.
Sorry.
We'll let that go.
All right.
So it's all about, you know, you need to know something about the decision makers. You need to know what makes them tick. You need to know what concerns they have. So advocacy is all about persuasion and negotiation, and it's different from the stand up and rebelling part, but the two go together so in such an important way. And very often the activism, direct action comes first, and then the advocacy piece sometimes comes later.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're simultaneous as well. I mean, I can think about, well, actually in this legislature, just a few weeks ago, we had people holding signs and marching around outside the State House in Maine about consumer-owned utility, while the advocates, which I was one of them, was inside the State House talking to the legislators saying, what can I do to get you to vote for this bill? So, so those are the two things. And so I thought, you know, calling this advocating for the environment, I bring in some things about direct action, but it's really all about that persuasion. It's about building bridges, especially with people who hold different worldviews and different positions than you do. You have to work with all of them. So these are the skills you need to be able to take your issue and get it over the line and get the decision you want to be made. So
Wonderful. It's, I know that you know that I'm a psychologist by training.
yeah,
And there's a lot of psychology in all of your work.
yeah.
And it
yeah.
comes through in the early part where you're talking about how to put language and thought together. And then in the second part of how to put that into action. And so it's,
Yeah.
and I was reminded in reading your writing of a book I had in college. It was probably my second year of college, by S.I. Hayakawa. Does that name mean anything to anybody? And he wrote a book called Language in Thought and Action. And it was a terrific book, you know, and it just happened to be on a syllabus for me in a class. But it was really life-changing because he really showed the way in which language works in different kinds of ways. And what the words are may not be the meaning. The meaning could be many other kinds of things, all at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what got me interested in psychology, because I started to listen to people, not just to what's behind what you're trying to do in different kinds of ways. And so anyhow, that is mixed in with what you're doing in a really powerful way.
Yeah, actually, after I finished writing the book, I kind of realized in a sense that the whole book is about empathy, really. Because
Yes.
even the chapter on working with the media, it's about understanding where journalists are coming from and how you can help them write your story, right?
Right.
And it's about empathy with not only those people who support you, but also to the extent you can do it with your opponents. You need to understand where they're coming from. And then, of course, decision makers. So I agree, there is a lot of psychology. I think that's something you and I share, is we both are really interested in what motivates people, you know, and that's a lot of what advocacy
And
is
it's that
about.
kind of active listening that he was talking about, which
Yeah.
turns out to be a big piece of psychology also, is when you're listening to someone, you're really trying to receive you're
Yeah.
really trying to hear them
Yeah.
in a way. And did you ever take improv?
I've done a few workshops in that.
You know the first rule of improv?
It's to repeat back, isn't it? What
Everybody know what that first
I
rule
think
is?
that's what it is.
The first rule of improv? Yes? Yes. Yes, and.
Yes, and, right,
Yes,
that's
and.
right. I remember, yeah,
And that is such a beautiful concept because most of the academic world, you go, yes, but.
right,
Like, that's what you have to say, but
Right.
here's what I got to say.
right.
And to do that the other way, to actually receive what you,
Mhm.
because you care about what, you want to know what the person actually thinks.
Yeah,
It runs through your method all the way through here.
Right.
I think it's just really powerful.
yeah, and again, that goes back to activism versus advocacy.
Yeah.
Because activism would be sort of but, and advocacy is yes, and.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And I would probably pull that up to be, maybe it's also the first rule of human ecology. If
Mm,
you're trying to do something that's interdisciplinary, it's not like the physicist debates the chemist
yeah,
or something, or the biologist or something like that. And then, oh, let me tell you what I think. But I actually listen to you, and then you end up inventing something that might be biogeochemistry,
Yeah.
which is because of good listening, you now have put ideas together.
Yeah.
And I think these are all on a really nice parallel track.
yeah,
So
yeah,
loved it.
yeah.
So, elsewhere, as we go into the book a little bit further, I was happy to see, I think it's probably the third section, where you get into vision.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
And I want you to say something about that. Maybe you could even, can you pull out, would you read a little piece of it? It's too long to read the whole thing, but a lot of the book is about how to do things. But Sue also has a reason why to do things, which I think is really, and she doesn't start with that because that could get a little preachy, but you reveal it almost, that
Mhm.
there's something deeper in here that makes you care about the world and do what you do and things like that. So could you take a selection?
Yeah,
that.
certainly. And I'll say a few words about that too, because, one of the things I find troubling is that, our media is all about bad news and it's all about fear, right? And the problem I have with that is that we want to, at least for me, I have a strong idea that we want to get to a healthier future, a more equitable future. And in order to do that, we have to focus on that, right? We can't just focus on what's wrong and get to where we want to go. That's just not how the world works.
Right.
So we have to be focused on where we do want to go. And this whole book is about how to do that. And as Rich says, at the end, I put in my personal vision, which I'll read a little excerpt about that. So the personal vision is all life on earth is respected, revered, and nurtured. And then underneath that, I have a whole bunch of bullet points that are specifics about that. And I'll read you some of these. So all life on earth is respected, revered, and nurtured. No race, class, gender, or any group of people is judged to be better or worse than any other. All people have access to fresh water, nutritious food, and safe housing. The Earth's natural ecosystems are thriving. Farming, forestry, and fishing both harvest and replenish the Earth's bounty. Every child has a healthy, loving, and safe home. All people have access to affordable, high-quality healthcare. All people have an opportunity to learn in a wide variety of high-quality educational settings. All people have an opportunity to succeed in expressing their unique gifts in the world. Every woman can choose the number of children she has. Governments set reasonable rules based on what the majority wants, and enforcement of those rules emphasize helping violators find a better path rather than punishing them. The world economy serves people equitably, is based on providing goods and services people need, and is not dominated by fear, lack, or greed. The world's unique peoples and cultures respect each other's differences and live in peace. So that's basically the vision that I'm trying to get to. And if we're focusing on all these problems, we're not going to get there. But I hope that in writing the book, I can bring more people on board to say, let's work on the positive. Let's work on what we do want for our children and our grandchildren. And I feel just so passionately about that. And that's my motivation.
It's
really.
nicely worded, and it's very hard to disagree with any of it, which is what I especially like.
Yeah,
And if we could write those all up on the board now,
yeah,
I could go back through your resume and snip out projects that you did. And I say, well, this working waterfront thing, well, that belongs over here.
yeah,
Right. And the getting broadband out to the rural community, well, that belongs over here.
yeah,
And it really frames what you're doing. And I like that.
yeah,
I like that there is, as a psychologist, as a person, I like that people have something that they actually believe in and are able to find words to say it out loud.
yeah,
And we've spoken about this before, but it reminds me, many years ago, there was a broadcaster, Edward R. Murrow, who this was back in the 50s. And he was the first person to do used television to make documentaries. I think it was Bob, was it Harvest of Shame? And then there's the Edward R. Murrow Award for documentary and stuff
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Just a really creative, interesting guy. And he created a little program called This I Believe. And he had people, he started off with well-known people, you know, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt and Einstein and stuff, trying to write in whatever, 1,000 words or less. So what's the core of your thing, which fits in very much with Maslow's sort of psychology and things like that. The show was tremendously popular, and people on their own just started to write them in, send them in, and they were read on the radio show, and that was good. And there it was, a little piece of history. Well, National Public Radio resurrected that 50 years later, and that's how some of you may have come across it. Same thing, they got some well-known people, Steve Jobs and all that kind of stuff, and then I think they had 150,000 people write in because of the challenge of doing it with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those were read on the, actually, many of those have come out in books. I think there's a couple of volumes of those. And what you did there is in that zone,
Yeah.
which I think is so helpful, not for just for other people, but for yourself to know, why am I doing what I'm doing? And
Right.
to really have the depth of all that is just terrific.
Yeah. And I think, you know, College of the Atlantic was a great fit for me in that way, because I think that's where I was developing these ideas really of what I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing too in the book is that it's just so important that we have a critical mass of people who are basically working towards this vision, because that's what we need in order to turn things around. In fact, you know, everybody knows that we're kind of, you know, close to a cliff on how we are treating the earth, and that it's, you know, our way of doing business, our way of governing, our way of consuming things in our lives is not on a sustainable path.
Right.
But what that does is it opens the opportunity to do something different and create this world that is more equitable, more just, and healthier.
Mm-hmm.
So we're right at a place where we need to make a big shift. And I think we can do it. And I'm hoping that my book will help sort of spur that.
I think it helps a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it clarifies a lot, but it also helps people to understand how the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
I mean, you go through all the different sort of tools that are used to make change.
Yeah.
And then there's a coherence in them because you see them together, and then you start to think about what am I good at, or what do I want to do, or how do I want to be involved in things. And at the end of it, I had this sort of profound feeling that you really believe in democracy.
Yeah.
You know, you really believe in citizen action
Mm-hmm.
somehow or other. And a lot of what the book is about is how to spur that.
Yeah.
In a collaborative, visionary kind of way.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Boy, that's a very deep question. I mean, I think it comes from faith in people and faith in the spiritual universe. I think life wants to continue,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's in all of us. In fact, there's a Bible quote in the book about that, saying that, you know, that the truth is written in our hearts, and that there'll come a time when we won't have to actually expound on it because we'll all just know it's there, which I consider to be a great prophecy. And that's actually in the introduction of the book, that prophecy. So I think, you know, we have a choice to make. You know, we can go down into violence, into scarcity, into, you know, problems with water and fire and all these things, or we can take the opportunity and we can build it into the world that we want.
Yeah.
So I think that just comes from a very deep place for me, actually.
Well, that's like if your ship has a twin keel, that's one of the keels.
Yeah.
The other one is the advocacy,
Yes.
and that you really believe in the power of persuasion.
Yes.
So,
well, and that comes from the same thing, because I think even the most hardened politician actually has a heart, right? And so the challenge is, how do you get to that? How do you get through all the resistance and the, you know, the ideology, and that's the challenge, is you're trying to reach that person's heart. And that's why citizen engagement is so important, because citizens bring the stories to decision makers about how they're affected by policies, right? And if citizens don't stand up and articulate their stories, then all you have is the paid lobbyists out there who are trying to create the rules to perpetuate their business or whatever their thing is. But there's this huge important role that citizens play And I hope that citizens do it. And instead of becoming discouraged, but to actually stand up and do it, because the decision makers need to hear that. You're actually bringing them a gift. I say that in the book. If you bring your story to the decision maker, you're helping them do their job. And if you don't do it, they won't have that piece. And it's pretty easy to get won over by very articulate lobbyists who might be advocating for something that's harmful to the earth. So that's why it's like the citizen role is much more important than I think people believe. In fact, I run into a lot of people who say, well, yeah, I don't know if it'd be worth my going to testify or my writing a letter. It is very worth it. And in fact, in Maine, it only takes 5 letters to change a decision maker's view. Only 5. I mean, that's how few people actually do it.
Mhm.
And citizens actually don't know always the power that they have, but decision makers know. They know who's paid a lot of money to talk, and they know who's coming in and saying, look, my well has been contaminated by PFAS or whatever it is. So yeah, that's how important this work is.
Yeah. And the book is written to individuals. I can read the book for myself.
Yeah.
And I get something from it that might spur me to do things, because now I know how to get something done that I
Right.
hadn't known about before and things like that. But you've also turned it into taken a body of literature and a number of ideas and life experiences and turned it into a teachable subject.
Mm-hmm.
And what's it been like? Who are the students? Why do they come there? And I can see how this could be on a curriculum of a lot of places.
Yeah, the teaching has been really fun. And I get a lot of environmental science students who are coming to my class because they're saying, I know some of the science, but I don't know how to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all the skills, what I teach is advocacy skills. So I teach them how to talk to people. It's been really successful in that way. It's a missing piece. And I think colleges are realizing too that they need to give these kinds of practical skills to their students. So
Mhm.
that's why I've been welcomed in, to teach.
I remember, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 years ago, and you would remember this too at about that same time, when the group facilitation was developed
Yeah.
as a real skill. Instead of things being top down, it was like bottom up.
Mhm.
And how do you work a collection? And the college was built around this from the very beginning,
Mhm.
but it actually became much more of a formalized set of practices,
Yeah.
where you've actually been trained and I've had that as a background. And I remember the first time I saw it done well. It was actually done by Don Strauss's son, David, who
Oh, yeah.
actually built a big business out of this.
He's
and how to
good,
make- Very successful. And he came in and demonstrated it once when I was teaching with Don. And his capacity to become an absolute neutral figure, to sit there and whatever was coming up, he would just catch it and juggle it into the mix and stuff like that. It was so artful.
Mhm.
I really liked it. And in some ways, you are inventing the next generation of that.
Hmm.
You're talking about a skill set now that's not just facilitation anymore.
Right.
It is active now. This steps into things. And how do you step into things not against people, but with people and bring people to it?
Yeah.
And I can see where this is really useful and important, especially with the future of the environmental kinds of issues.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right. I actually got a certificate in facilitation
I saw that.
years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it is sort of a thing.
but the first time you see that,
Mm.
we all know people who are good at making an event somewhat successful, but to really be in that very special role and something that always astounded me and I mean directly is that, and I've seen you've come to our classes over the years, and anytime you come, you're in the middle of some other major thing. You're usually out in the middle of the stream,
Yeah.
and there's rocks and everything else. It's not a pretty sight, and you're in the middle of it and you're happy.
Yeah.
And I've often wondered, because I don't know if I can hold myself that steady all the time. I've been in we've all been in situations where there's angry people and they're shooting at you.
Mm-hmm.
But you have found some way to let that go by and still hold your place.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, after it's over, they're with you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me one of those stories.
Well, it's not always a great success.
Well, but it can be.
But it can be. And one of the things I talk about in the book too, especially in the using your power for good place, is to put your personal agenda aside. When I walk into the State House, I kind of leave it outside the door so that I don't take anything personally. Because you just can't do that. People can come at you from, any angle you can imagine, and it's not always a nice one. So, you have to be prepared for that. But once you prepare for that, then you can maybe more spontaneously respond to what people are saying to you. And, and there are times where you have to draw a line. I remember one time when another advocate went in front of a legislative committee and basically trashed the state planning office, which I was representing. And so I saw this person the next day in the hall of the State House, and I went over to him and I said, I really want to work with you, but when you do things like that, it makes it really hard, and so that, got things back on track. But sometimes you have to call it in that way.
And you have to chase it down.
And chase it down, yeah. And I just thought, well, I just can't let that go unsaid. He just made my job much harder.
But also sometimes you're in the room and you can't escape it, and you can't do that afterwards. You're in the room with 100 angry men.
Right.
And do you want to tell that story?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a little story. I tell my classes this story called 100 Angry Men. And what it was is I was going to City of Portland to do a public hearing on the building and energy codes. And me and my assistant, Amy, who just the two of us, and we walked into this room and there were 100 people there, almost entirely men. And most of them were in uniform, whether it was fire chief or police chief or sheriff or whatever. And so I thought, oh boy, here we go, and but what I determined to do is I thought, well, I'm just going to treat each person with respect. And I also knew they were all very fearful. And that's a big subject right now is, there's a lot of fear out there in all different kinds of ways. And this group was really fearful that our building and energy code was going to take away their fire code on which their entire employment was based. So that was the major thing, is I was just reassuring them, we're not touching the fire code at all. What we're doing is we're adding a building and energy code, and for these reasons, and I'd sort of give the rationale and just take all of their questions. And some of them were asked in not nice ways. They're trying to trap us with their questions. But the key to that was just continuing to have respect for them and saying, well, yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. Here's how I would answer that one. And so it went for 2 hours of that. And even I was amazed at how well we did, Amy and I did on it. It was like, wow, I guess we can do this, because it was a little dicey, but we carried on.
Well, that's the evidence that it can be done.
And that's
and that's what makes you want, we can come back and we're not afraid of problems.
That's right. We're not afraid of problems. We can do it. But it's not to say that there are sometimes people who are not persuadable. There's always going to be an element of people that, for, whatever reasons, they hold a completely different worldview. They have a tremendous fear of what you're trying to accomplish. So some people you have to let them go.
Yeah.
And say, well, if we get like a majority, we're good. And if we don't get this and this person, we'll still be okay.
Yeah.
Because you can't please everyone, right? But you have to, in fact, I talk about that in here in strategy is, you need to pick who it is you want to put time into persuading. And it's not everyone. You want to pick the people that are kind of in the middle. Maybe they have some concerns that you can address. You can even amend the bill or, make changes to accommodate some of them. So those are the middle people, and those are the people you can work with.
Sort of a form of triage in a way.
It's triage. There's some people that, they're never going to come over to your side.
Yeah.
So you just let them be and put your time into the people that you think you can reason with.
Great.
Yeah.
Great fun. We've covered a lot of the stuff in the book.
Yeah.
And I hope people will get the book and read it and enjoy it and use it. And so forth. But is there anything we haven't touched on that you would?
There's only one thing I would say, and that is, I know people can be intimidated by advocacy, but when I use that word advocacy, I mean it really broadly. If your thing is making art, then that's your form of advocacy. If your thing is making music, that's your form of advocacy. I don't mean everyone has to go and testify or go to city council, but I do mean that everyone should find their own way of advocating if we're going to get to the vision of the future we want. So whatever it is you do, I hope you use it to try to move forward on a more equitable and inclusive and healthier environmental world.
And the origins of the word are actually more benign than people think of it.
Now, you told me that, yeah.
Yeah, it really means to call forth, I think, or to support.
Yeah.
It's got a supportive thing. It's not an attack.
Yeah,
Advocates are not attacking.
yeah,
And so I think that word is an important one. It's one that might grow now in utility and understanding
yeah,
for this.
yeah, yeah, I hope so.
So I want to ask you about the future.
Oh, all right.
I would ask you, well, what's next?
Yeah,
And maybe this is what's next, but you know Maine inside and out.
yeah.
You know, you've been in every conceivable dimension of this state. How do you see the future?
For me personally?
Maine? Yeah.
Or of Maine?
When you look well, you too,
Yeah.
but especially Maine, how do you see, where are we headed? How's it going?
Well, Maine, actually, we're so lucky to be in Maine because we actually have a really pretty strong bipartisan state,
Yeah.
really. And we've just finished an incredible legislative session. We passed a lot of things that were first time in this country. Divesting state funds, invested funds from fossil fuels. We're the
Right.
first state to do that. Extended producer responsibility. That means that makers of packaging will have to pay a fee to recycle it. We're the first state to have passed that. What else? We've got tremendous laws around cleaning up and banning PFAS, toxic chemicals.
yeah.
And we even put that in the budget. There's, I think, 30-40 million in Maine state budget to clean that stuff up. So we have a long ways to go, but we are really setting an example for the rest of the country here in Maine right at the moment. And it's so exciting to see that. And I've been working in the legislature recently on a couple of issues. I could talk about those if you like.
Please.
Yeah, so there's,
We have a little bit of time and then we
All
got to
right.
go to Q&A. So go
we'll
ahead.
give a
with-
minute or two to what I'm working on
yeah,
currently.
to
Okay.
looking ahead, yeah.
Yeah, because the book, of course, is all about doing things. So, of course, I can't stay away from doing things myself. So I'm working on one thing is called the Pine Tree Amendment.
Mhm.
And this is a constitutional amendment that would add the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment to our state constitution. Now, you might think we have these rights, and perhaps morally we do, but they're not in law. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to carry arms, but we don't have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. So this issue is to try to put that in the Constitution. And you're going to hear more about this because
That's happening around the world in the constitutions
It-
of certain countries. Though,
it
yeah.
is, and there are 13 states
Yeah.
working on these constitutions. 2 states have them, 13 states are working on trying to get them put in place. Maine is one of those. We're going to take this to the legislature in January. We had it in this legislature and we tabled it because for a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 in the House and Senate, and we were really close, but we weren't sure that we were quite there yet. So we're building support now so that people will call their legislators and so that we'll get the vote in January. And then it goes to a citizen referendum after that because all constitutional amendments are voted on by the voters. So that's be next
Okay.
November.
Good.
Yep, if we pass it. So there's that. And then I'm also working on the consumer-owned utility.
Yeah.
And that's the concept of bringing our electric utilities back to Maine. Right now, they're owned by foreign governments. Versant is owned by the city of Calgary. Central Maine Power is owned by Norway, Spain, and Qatar, among other investors. And not surprisingly, their interests are not focused on the needs of Maine electricity ratepayers. So this initiative is to bring back ownership of our electric utility here in Maine. And it's really needed. If we're going to make any of these climate goals, we have to have, ownership of our electric utilities. So those are the 2 major issues. I'm also working a little on toxics. I'm on the board of Defend Our Health, which is an organization doing great work. They did all the PFAS work in the state legislature. So I'm on the board of that group. So there's plenty for me to,
Yeah, and also the
play
phone
with.
is going to be ringing for you to teach more classes too.
oh yeah, I don't know. We'll
So-
see what happens with that. But yeah, teaching I really enjoy. So
Terrific,
hopefully
terrific.
could do more.
Yeah, listening to you, it just is so refreshing. And I'm reminded of Ed Gilbert, because
Yeah.
this college was a dream. I mean, when they hired Ed,
Yeah.
not only wasn't there college, it was not a college. There wasn't even a name for a possible college. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Just the mere thought, well, maybe
Yeah.
it could happen. And he helped to, as he would say, arrange affairs so that people would work together over time.
Yep.
And here we are. And I remember I got to know Ed. We got to know Ed quite well in his later life too. And he said one time, trying to characterize himself, he said, "I guess I'm a stubborn optimist."
You did say that. Yeah. I remember that.
Do you remember?
I actually do. Yeah.
And that was very Ed to sort of, because he always had to have some, he's a stubborn optimist. You're just a plain optimist.
Oh, just a plain one.
No, really,
Yeah.
it's not a battle for you. You just,
Right.
you truly enjoy the work.
I do enjoy the work.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah. And I talk about practicing optimism in the book as well.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're running into the little end here. I think we have some questions, and
Yeah,
we'll
happy
start
to.
here and then go there. Go ahead.
Yeah, first I want to thank you here, and I love what you read. It's very inspiring, and it sounds like you win millennial goals. But also, you made me feel good about one decision I made about 2 years ago, which is to take my retirement portfolio and put half of it into socially responsible investing.
Yeah.
There's a companies, and I don't know if you get into it, but it's ESG.
Mhm.
Environmental, sustainable, and governmental actions that the funds that manage what I put in look for that and advocate
Yeah.
at corporate level. So I didn't know, like I didn't know I was speaking in prose. Now I've been an advocate for the last 2 years.
Mhm.
But my question to you, and it's going to be a tough one, is you mentioned activists,
Mhm.
and you gave examples of nonviolent, peaceful activists.
Mhm.
Yet there's folks out there like Greenpeace warriors putting spikes in trees and ramming whaling ships. So does your book get into that? And do you have a sense that these people should be disowned from the peaceful activism, that you don't want to support what they're doing because it's going to backfire? There's something like that in your book, what you're thinking.
Mhm.
That's a long thing to summarize, but can you grab the core of that? What
Yeah.
the actual, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. The first part of it, I'm just saying this because I know the virtual people can't hear the question, so I'm going to repeat it. First of all, kudos to you for your ESG investing. Putting your money where your values are is a great way to advocate. So I would strongly support that. And then the question was about, what about environmental advocates that use violent means? And I do address that in the book, and I'm not in favor of that. It's never good to try to bring peace by violent means, right? There's a contradiction in doing that. You're not bringing to the world what you want when you act violently, and that even includes violent words, not just actions. But I think that, violent words are probably not helpful in most cases. On the other hand, though, I do understand why people get so frustrated that they'd want to use violence. It's understandable. I think some people have fought for years on certain things and feel like they haven't been heard, and they feel driven to do that. And I understand where they're coming from without supporting that way of doing it. So,
There's a question right back there.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm proud father of a graduate here of Pennsylvania. But I wanted to mention, my name is Alan Cohen. I just moved to Winterport in December, and I've gotten involved in the NAP, the Nordic Aquafarms.
Oh, yeah.
Issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if your book addresses, you talk about advocacy, but what about corruption? The entire Belfast City Council has been bought off by the promises of a tremendous amount of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Janet Mills has been bought off by that. She's a big advocate for this huge aquaculture. Instead of vernacular aquaculture that's happening right now, there's scallop farming, there's mussel farming, there's all these great health things that are happening in the college. There's graduates that are working on this. But this thing is going to be 14 football fields large. They can't build in Norway anymore. They've been banned from Norway. We had someone from our town go and look in Norway. So they're going to Canada, they're going to Maine. We feel that her brother, Janet Mills' brother, intervened in the DEP people don't even have title to the intertidal waterway right now to put the pipeline. So they, anyway, there's some court cases on that right now. What happens when you have corruption? You can't advocate with people who are being paid off. They're not going to listen. They're not going to change their minds. The entire Belfast City Council has just rolled over for this. And it's ironic because I never knew Belfast when they had the chicken processing plant there in the harbor, and it was cleaned up. There was a philanthropist to the BNA, the
MBNA.
car guy who did that, and it's just beautiful now. And now they want to put another polluting, smelly place in its place, and it's going to totally disrupt the energy budget, the carbon budget of the state, because they're going to have 8 diesel generators that have to kick in if power goes out, and our power is notoriously unreliable, essentially. So they're going to be polluting with that. They're going to be putting 70 million gallons of water into the bay, and yet the city council has rolled over for it. DEP has rolled over for it. Maine has this whole, the governor has this whole pressure on many aquaculture projects instead of encouraging the vernacular. So how do you deal with corruption? I mean, my solution is we need to run for these offices, not just advocate, the people who are there, but the activists need to actually run for these offices and challenge.
Which is one solution. So let me repeat the question for people who couldn't hear that. So the questioner was asking about Nordic Aquafarms, which is a very large salmon farming, it's a land-based salmon farming operation proposed for Belfast. And he's asking about corruption in decision-making on the part of decision makers, which is a tough problem. But I think, that's where citizen action is really important, because it's citizens who can bring that to the media and make it more transparent and demand transparency. I don't know all the details of that case, but I think that's what the advocates are trying to do, which is important to do that. And I think really, I could speak to that at a higher level too, which is that kind of where we are in a way is that large corporate entities have taken on a lot of power at this time. And so that's why it's even more important for citizens. The only thing that can break that cycle is citizen action. So, we've gotten to a place where, there's a lot of money in politics, right? And so the way to stand up to that is through citizens, through numbers of people who are honest, who are bringing the story of what this means to our community to the table. So that's what has to happen. And that's really the only way to break through that I know of.
Great.
Yeah.
We'll take one more, and then I've got a couple here from the online.
Questions?
Yeah, I'll try
Great.
to handle those. Yes, right
Great.
there.
Do you talk about compromise in your book, and are you willing to be persuaded that maybe your idea isn't as good as somebody else's? And have you ever had a situation where somebody has?
Great question. So the question is about compromise, and have there been times when I've had to compromise my position? And the answer is almost always. For example, on the building and energy codes, it's really interesting. Things come at you that you'd never expect sometimes. And an example of that was in the building and energy codes was that the lumber, Maine lumber people wanted to get something in there that made it so that there was a preference for buying Maine produced lumber versus importing it. And honestly, we thought that's actually a good idea. Let's put an amendment in the bill and include that. So very often that's what happens. That was happening with the consumer-owned utility just a few weeks ago when we put an amendment in at the last minute because we realized, there was a change that was appropriate that someone persuaded us to make. So it is, they call legislation a sausage making machine for a reason, because it is. There is a need to compromise, and usually you're pretty clear on what things cannot be compromised and what things, we actually could bend on that one, or that's an interesting, and this is what's great. People bring ideas that actually can be good. So you need to listen to that and then figure out, okay, what things can we compromise on?
Well, the other side of the coin on compromise is sometimes it's really the way in which you combine values.
Right.
That you wouldn't expect to have come together, but now they're together, and that's a different vision.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not always bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes it actually has positive combinations.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Yeah.
So let me go here because we're almost out of time, and there's two questions, one from the past and one back to the future.
Okay.
And the one from the past was, were you aware of any of the precursor experiments to COA, such as Black Mountain College, Bennington, or Marlborough? In addition to your dedication to environmental advocacy, what persuaded you to attend at that time when the college was less than 10 years old? This is coming from Jared Beitman.
Okay. Yeah, interesting question. I did not shop around with other colleges at the time because my roommate from Colby had already transferred to COA, and I could see when I came to visit her that the College of the Atlantic was environmentally oriented, and really it allowed for some creativity and flexibility in creating my curriculum, which were both things I was looking for. So there was what I was looking for. So I didn't look at other colleges. And I have to say that COA is the one that has outlasted almost all those other schools too.
Well,
So
Bennington's holding on.
Bennington's holding on.
And
Yeah.
they're doing well, actually.
Yeah. My grandfather was teaching at Franconia College at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they, of course, went out of
That was
business.
a sad story. There's
Yep.
a lot of those
Yep.
out there.
So anyway, so I wasn't shopping, but I found what I was looking for here.
Good.
Yeah.
And here's the other one, a different question. And I'll have to go slowly because this is fairly long. With the current Republican focus on keeping government out of all functions and denying any people-oriented socialist program in this mainly Republican state, how can you imagine that a publicly controlled utility will work for all the people when Republicans hold power in the legislature and governor's mansion?
Oh, so that's an interesting question because the bill actually passed the House and Senate with bipartisan sponsorship. And the reason or the way that we got that was because we were saying, let's bring our utilities back home. And I think that there's even Republicans, not all Republicans, of course, but there are enough Republicans in Maine who want to have control over their utility that is appealing to them. They don't want to be a colony controlled by
Right.
people from away, which is how they would express it. So I think that's how we arrived at that bipartisan position. Now, not everybody's going to agree with it. And certainly there are some people who are afraid of making this change. And that's the other thing I can say about, this is a kind of a broad sweeping generalization, but a lot of Republicans are afraid of losing their freedom. I think that's kind of at the base of a lot of their policy positions. And so I think, in a big picture way, a need to persuade them that people that are more progressive are not looking to take away anyone's freedom. Actually, in some ways, we're looking to expand people's freedom. But to address that, to address that fear of I won't be able to live my life the way I want to, that's a key part of advocating and working with conservatives.
Mm-hmm. Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, Sue, that's great. I wanted to add one last note, and that is, if anybody wonders what Sue's senior project was at COA,
Oh.
it's quite fitting in a way.
Yeah.
And what it was about was looking at the prospects for a new natural foods business in Maine.
Yep.
And the director of your senior project was Rock Cavano,
Yep.
who we've recently lost. And I hope you and Bob will be able to go and see the show that they're doing now in the Northeast Harbor Library. And there's a couple of Rock's paintings right down here on the left of Jim Gower and Les Brewer and Ann Peach and Ed.
Wow.
And
yeah.
so I thank you and thank everyone for coming, and please get this book. You'll want it.
Yeah, and I have a newsletter sign-up list there too. I do a blog about every other week. So if that's of interest, put your email address there and I can put you on the list.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you, everybody.
Who spilled the coffee?
Someone over there.
Thanks, Sue.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Rich. I just wanted to conclude with a reminder that starting Monday, we have our College of the Atlantic Summer Institute that's focused on food. And on Monday, I'll be talking with Michael Pollan as our kickoff Monday at 5 o'clock. He will be here virtually, and to register, you need to visit coa.edu and make sure you register, whether you're coming in person to join us on the front lawn or whether you'll be joining us remotely. So thank you again, Sue and Rich, and hope to see many of you next week. Bye for now.